What's up, everybody? Hope y'all doing good. It's a beautiful evening. Thank you very much for stopping by. You are very much appreciated. Today, hey, I see you. I know you all over the place watching us. Thank you for stopping by. Before we start, let's subscribe if it's not done yet. We are family for sure. We're gonna like each other, no doubt about it. And also, after subscribing, is it done yet? Great. We're all gonna do this so we can push our video further. Okay, great. So today we're not going to waste time. We have a lot to talk about. Man, hopefully I can cover all of it very quickly. Okay, so thank you very much for watching us. I'm Zack, Mwekassa, the Black Warrior. Surely you're going to discover who I am. So basically today we're going to talk about President Cyril Ramaphosa and what he did. He just did something very, very powerful. Okay, we're going to talk about Cuba and Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe and Cuba. But you're going to be patient to hear the whole story so we can understand each other. Okay. So President Cyril Ramaphosa has done something very interesting. He went to the United Nations and made a speech that baffled many people. In fact, he just emphasized things that many people know about. Basically, the sanction that's on Zimbabwe and Cuba. The sanction that have been there for the longest time. And people are tired of it. It's about time they leave the sanctions, okay? So Zimbabwe and Cuba normally cannot trade. Zimbabwe doesn't trade with any country because they have been sanctioned, yeah. That's why Zimbabwe is stalling, going through a very difficult time. Same for Cuba. Cuba has gone through some of the harshest time ever because they had been ostracized by the United Nations and the United States of America. They pushed Cuba to the side. Cuba cannot trade with anybody because of America. So Cyril Ramaphosa, president of South Africa, addressed the United Nations General Assembly on Tuesday. The president said in his speech was centered around the world peace effort and the role of international community. Ramaphosa highlighted the social-economic effects of 60 years of embargo on Cuba by the United States of America. 60 years, brothers. 60 years of embargo. I mean, like, sometimes you're angry at somebody, but you can 60 years of anger? Wow. He says 60 years of embargo has caused untold damage to the country's economy and the people of Cuba. Ramaphosa also highlighted the plight of Zimbabweans in South Africa. Zimbabwe, please show the map. I'll please show the map of Cuba so people can understand. And the map of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is in Southern Africa, right next to South Africa. And obviously, if Zimbabwe is hit by sanction, people from Zimbabwe are going to flee from Zimbabwe and go to neighboring countries. And in this situation, most come to South Africa, and it creates problems, sometimes. Ramaphosa said the sanctions that are also being applied on South Africa's neighbor Zimbabwe should also be lifted, as they are imposing untold suffering on ordinary Zimbabweans, but also have collateral damage or impact on a neighboring country, such as our own, South Africa. So the sanctions against Zimbabwe should be lifted. The sanction against Cuba should be lifted, because it's been too many years, 60 years. Sanction against Zimbabwe should be lifted because it is affecting not only Zimbabwean normal human beings, but as well South Africans, because now you have to fight for survival. You know, you have to go to the neighboring country. Hopefully you can get a better life, but then it creates much competition into the job market sometimes, not necessarily understood by the normal John Doe. So why have these countries been sanctioned? There are two main reasons. We're first going to start with Cuba, then we're going to explain why Zimbabwe is sanctioned. Please stay on the video so you can understand. I really want all of us to understand what's happening in the world. So the reason why Cuba is sanctioned is basically because the Cuban people came and toppled their president at the time. In the 1960s, toppled their president and took the head of the power because they felt that their president was working more for the Western countries than for the Cuban people. And because the Cuban toppled the president and took the power, changed the economy into socialist country, America did not like that. So in 1952, the American allied dictator General Fulgencio Batista led a coup d'etat against the president at the time, Carlos Pryor, and forced him into exile in Miami. Then in 1958, this inspired Fidel Castro, that you see very much into t-shirts, to topple this American-based president named General Fulgencio Batista. Castro did something very interesting. He nationalized American businesses in Cuba, including banks, oil refinery, sugar and coffee plantation. He nationalized American businesses, banks, oil refineries, sugar and coffee plantation. How do you get oil refineries in somebody else's country? Like, how do you have that much How do you have that amount of power? You're in somebody else's country, but you have oil refineries and banks and sugar and coffee plantation. That's very interesting. Then in 1961, they beat a CIA-backed uprising. So basically, the CIA supported an uprising. In 1961, Cuba, under the leadership of Castro, defeated CIA-sponsored invasion, the Bay of Pigs. So the CIA came with a plan to topple Fidel Castro. So they armed a group of people, asking them to go and attack. These people went into Cuba and they were completely defeated in 1961 in what is called the invasion of Bay of Pigs. So the Cuban people won. So you understand, fellas, what happened here? What happened is very clear. The Cuban people toppled the president that was working for the United States of America and Western nations. They took over their country back and they nationalized oil refineries, sugarcane plantation, banks, and many other American businesses. And obviously, because America doesn't like that, they got sanctions. You can't export, you can't import, you can't buy, you can't sell, you can't talk, you can't do anything. They went into a campaign into vilifying the Cubans, making them feel like such bad people. So no other country can cooperate with them. So basically, you know how it works. When America sanctions a country, you as another country do not have the rights to discuss or even exchange with this country anymore. Yeah, because if you do that, then you become the enemy of Americans. And obviously, most countries don't want to be enemy of Americans. They're going to put you to the side. Even the people that really like you, they're going to be scared. That's what happened to Cuba. That's happened 60 years ago. Now, let's look at the goals of the embargo against Cuba. Has it worked after 6 years? Number one, the objective was to put economical pressure on the government of Cuba at the time, leading an uproar from the population. They were hoping that the people would be very angry at the government because of the sanctions, because of the anger, the lack of food, the lack of medicine. They were hoping that Cuban people would be very angry and rise and fight and topple the government. It never happened. The Cuban people never rejected their own leaders. They stayed behind them. So that never worked. The second goal was to apply sanctions against the economy of Cuba, hoping to completely shut it down. Yes, they hit it pretty hard, but it didn't work. Because if you look from 1960 up until now, the economy of Cuba has grown. So they felt that. Number three, the embargo has killed more normal Cubans than the oligarch. Normal Cubans have suffered of the embargo because of the restriction in medicine and some stuff. Officially, they say there is no embargo against food and medicine. But in reality, it's not really the truth because some medicine actually stopped from coming into Cuba. And this was the reason why many people have passed with tuberculosis and many other diseases because they could not get the medication they needed. Number four, the embargo has not stopped the human rights violation they were accusing Cuba of. So if there was human rights violation, they say freedom of press in Cuba is the worst in the Western Hemisphere. It has not changed at all. So the embargo has not worked. And that's very sad to see. Now, you know what, fellas? Many years later down the road, many countries came together into the United Nations and they voted into changing this because Cuba had suffered for the longest time. Cuba has lost a lot of money into this embargo. Fidel Castro has survived 639 assassination attempts. 639. They haven't even tried to kill you one time, you're already crying the blood of Jesus. 639 times they've tried to take him out. They failed. Unbelievable. Now, fellas, you know, this just shows you how the world is not equal. The United Nations sat down and had a discussion about Cuba. And they said 185 countries voted against the sanction. 185 countries say enough, remove the sanction. And 2 countries say keep the sanction. The 2 countries are the United States of America and Israel. 185 countries say remove the sanction in the United Nations, and 2 countries say no, we're keeping the sanction. The sanction is still on Cuba, US and Israel. Now you tell me, why are these people sanctioned again? Because if the goal was Fidel Castro, is no more. If the goal was any other thing, they no more. But they still sanction the normal Cubans, or Cuban doctors are out of the country. Now Cuba has excelled in many other ways. Cuba has the highest literacy in the world. One of the highest literacy, yes. Better than America. One of the highest literacy in the world. In Cuba, 1 doctor is available for 150 patients. You have 1 doctor for 150 patients. In the UK, you have 2 doctors for 1,000 patients. In Cuba, you have one doctor for 150 patients. So Cuba has thrived in many other ways. Cuba has free healthcare, free education, free housing, along with employment security. Yes, it's not a capitalistic country, it's a socialist country. And they've tried their best. But unfortunately, it's very difficult to advance when nobody else talks to you. Same for Zimbabwe, fellas, okay? Cyril Ramaphosa spoke for Zimbabwe as well. Zimbabwe has been sanctioned for the longest time. These people are suffering for nothing. Why? Because Robert Mugabe said enough is enough. We want our lands back from the colonialists and their descendants in our country. The country was occupied by the colonialists, the descendants of the British that came to colonize Zimbabwe for many, many years. When Robert Mugabe came into power, he took the lands back and gave the lands to the people so they can be farmers as well. The land is everything. The land means the power. The land means the authority, the autonomy. The land's all the minerals. The land, you cannot say you're rich or you own a country if you do not have the land. He took the land. Yes, Mugabe could have done things differently, but he took the land, gave it to the people so they could run the country. And he was sanctioned. Not just him, the whole of Zimbabwe was sanctioned. They could not trade, could not commerce, could not import, could not export. If you do that with them, you violate the sanctions of the United States of America. And this is how they've lived for many, many years. And this was the reason why many Zimbabweans have left the country, going to the UK, going to South Africa, going to wherever they could so they can find a better life. Because in Zimbabwe then, the inflation, bread was so expensive. Things were very difficult. You couldn't go to hospitals. The doctors are running away because the country just cannot sustain itself. Yes, Mugabe gave the lands to the people of Zimbabwe. Unfortunately, many of those people were not experienced enough. They did not have the intelligentsia to run this land and be farmers because they had no experience, unfortunately. And you add that onto the sanction, it became very difficult for them to progress. The sanction was supposedly done against Mugabe, but Mugabe has been gone for the longest time. He's no more, but the sanction is still there. Why are the sanctions still against Zimbabwe? That's a big question. Obviously, Zimbabwe has lithium right now. They would like to come and take and loot and take. But unfortunately, the new president is not easy either. He doesn't let them come in with their mentality. He doesn't let them come in and just take things and go. So they don't like it. That's why Zimbabwe is still sanctioned. Thank you very much, fellas. Cuba, Zimbabwe, don't they need or deserve freedom? Let me know how you feel about this. It's always a great pleasure. Please contribute with your comment. You are very smart people and you're helping us grow together. God bless.